Liquifier's water flush seal bolt-on housing removal procedure. The Liquifier bolt-on housing offers a number of advantages. When you need to replace bearings or seals, your maintenance personnel may remove the bolt-on housing from underneath the blender. Another option is to purchase a spare housing with the seals, shafts, and bearings assembled and ready to be installed. This will decrease your plant downtime during the maintenance period. Our bolt-on housing comes with a customized hydraulic lift that will assist you in removing or installing the housing. The stand features two vertical support arms that attach to the housing. Be sure to turn off and lock out the electrical power to the blender before any maintenance procedure. The first step in removing the bolt-on housing is to detach the belt guard by unfastening the rubber mounting latches or removing the mounting bolts. Next, loosen the four motor mounting bolts and the belt adjustment screws and jam nuts. Pressure on the center of the belts should move the motor and drive pulley to create slack in the belts. Remove the loosened belts from the drive. Some units have multiple individual V-belts, and some have a single banded V-belt. Remove the belt guard transition plate by removing its mounting bolts. Remove any guards that may be on the bolt-on housing. Disconnect and remove the two water supply lines from the water flush seal housing. If your unit has grease-fitting supply lines, disconnect and remove them. Start attaching the stand by removing the housing bolts that would interfere with the support arm's mounting plate. You can loosen a number of the mounting bolts, but leave at least two opposing bolts tight until you have installed the hydraulic lift system. Roll the stand into place under the housing. Align the stand's mounting arms and plates with the threaded stand mounting holes in the housing, and attach the stand to the housing with its two 1/2 by 13 mounting bolts. Raise the stand to support the weight of the housing and remove all of the housing's mounting bolts. After removing all of the bolts, you can carefully lower the housing with the lift. You will need to roll the lift to the rear as you lower the housing to compensate for the forward motion of the support members. The lift will allow you to easily move the housing to a maintenance shop and out of your production area. Liquifier's water flush seal bolt-on housing, bearing, shaft, and seal disassembly and reassembly procedure. This video sequence will guide you through replacing the bearings, impeller shaft, and seal for Liquifier bolt-on housing with a water flush seal. Installing eye bolts will help attach lifting equipment to move the bolt-on housing from the hydraulic lift to the workbench. Take the pulley rim from the split tapered shaft by removing the 3 retaining bolts. Screw the 3 bolts into the threaded holes to release the rim from the hub. Before you remove the split tapered hub from the impeller shaft, measure the distance from the end of the shaft to the bottom face of the split hub. Save and use this distance to simplify pulley alignment during the assembly process. To relieve the split tapered hub from the shaft, you may need to drive a screwdriver tip into the hub scan to spread the bore in order to remove it and the key from the shaft. Install a pin in the hole in the impeller shaft to stop it from rotating as you remove the impeller from the shaft. Place a 1.5-inch socket wrench on the hex head of the impeller hub and turn it counterclockwise. Be careful to support the impeller's weight to avoid damaging the seal face as you remove the impeller from the shaft counterbore. You need to install 3 retaining clips to the lower outboard seal prior to removing the bearing and shaft assembly. The seal is spring-loaded to maintain the proper sealing pressure during blender operation. The retaining clips need to be installed to restrain the seal face and contain the springs within the assembly before you can remove it from the shaft. First, install the retaining clips using the supplied Allen set screws. After all 3 of the retaining clips are installed, you can loosen the 3 seal set screws, allowing the outboard seal to slide down on the shaft. Remove the 4 nuts and bolts holding the top bearing plate to the housing. Remove the 4 nuts and bolts holding the bottom bearing plate to the housing. Gently slide the shaft and bearings out of the housing. You may need to apply a slight pressure with a pry tool to free the shaft and bearings in order to start removing it from the housing. Use care not to mar the impeller shaft or the outboard seal seat in the bottom of the housing as you remove the shaft and bearings. This assembly is heavy and may need 2 individuals to lift it clear of the housing. If you need to replace the bearings or the outboard seal, you can remove the set screws and remove them from the shaft. You may need a hydraulic press to remove the bearings from the shaft. Assembly. The outboard seat, seal, and bearing are the first component that you will need to assemble and install on the impeller shaft. This subassembly consists of a seat for the outboard seal, the seal, and the top and bottom bearing assembly. The top bearing assembly is the shorter of the 2 assemblies and has an additional spacer that is added to the bearing during the installation. The bottom bearing assembly has a tall shoulder. The first step in replacing the bearings and seals is to make sure the counter bore in the bottom of the impeller housing is clean and that the housing's bearing surfaces are clean. Apply a small amount of food-grade lubricant to the counter bore and the seat to aid in installation. Alignment of the outboard seat's pin notch to the anti-rotation pin is important. The notch and pin must be aligned for the seal to fit flush with the bottom surface of the impeller housing plate. After installing the seat, take your finger and rub around the outside seat surface and housing to check for a uniform level fit. Make sure the seat is fully inserted in the counter bore. When the seat is fully inserted, the seat will protrude approximately 1/16 inch beyond the housing surface. Next, install the shaft bearings and the mechanical seal. Slide the upper bearing assembly and the lower bearing assembly on the shaft. Tighten the set screws lightly to hold them in place. Remember, the top bearing is shorter in height and has the 1/2 inch spacer between the bearing and the housing plate. The lower bearing is taller. You can measure the distance between the housing mounting plates to approximately position the bearings and spacer ring on the shaft. Lubricate the outboard mechanical seal and the impeller end of the shaft. Slip the outboard seal onto the top of the shaft and down to the upper bearing assembly. Lift the shaft and bearing assembly into the housing. It is heavy and is easier to align using 2 individuals. With the assembly in approximate position, loosen the bearing set screws. Attach the top bearing to the housing using 4 7/16 bolts with nuts and lock washers. Use never seize on all the bolt threads to aid in future disassembly. The 4 bolts holding the upper bearing assembly are installed, snugged down, and finally tightened in a circular order. The bottom bearing assembly is attached under the lower mounting plate using 4 7/16 bolts, nuts, and lock washers. Use never seize on all the bolt threads. The bolts are installed and tightened in a circular order. Place a pin through the hole in the shaft so it will ride against the side of the housing and stop the shaft from rotating while you set the proper shaft height. Use the supplied seal spacer and hub on the impeller to pull the shaft to the proper height. With the spacer in place, tighten the hub, pulling the shaft up until the assembly is tight on the shaft. With the seal spacer tightly in place, remove the pin from the shaft and tighten 3 of 4 of the bearing collar set screws. You need to create a dimple in the shaft for all 4 of the set screws. Remove one set screw at a time so you can create dimples in the drive shaft to secure the shaft in place. Use a center punch with a 5/16 shaft diameter to create a dent in the impeller shaft through the set screw hole. Now use a 5/16 metal cutting drill bit to create a dimple in the shaft through the hole. Only drill to the proper depth of the chamfered tip of the drill bit, no more than 1/8 of an inch. After drilling, blow the metal cuttings out of the opening with compressed air. Replace and tighten the Allen set screw. Repeat this dimpling procedure for the 3 remaining set screws. Replace the pin in the hole in the shaft to keep it from rotation while you remove the impeller hub and bearing spacer from the impeller shaft. Store your seal spacer in a secure location in order to use it for future maintenance. The first step in installing the impeller seal is to install the seal seat in the housing base. Lubricate the seat with a food-grade lubricant. There are 2 types of seats. One with a boot-style seal and one with an O-ring seal. This unit uses the O-ring type. Some of the housings have a pin in the counterbore which lines up with the groove in the seat. However, this installation does not have a pin in the counterbore. Use caution pressing the seat into the counterbore. The seats can break or chip if they are mishandled or forced. Damaged seats must be replaced. Carefully press the seat flush with the housing surface. Clean the seat and housing surface with a degreaser to remove any excess lubricant or foreign materials. The encapsulated impeller seal is spring-loaded and should be checked for proper movement prior to installation. There is a groove to hold a gasket between the impeller and the seal. Apply a small amount of food-grade lubricant to help install and hold the gasket in place. Use a small amount of never seize on the seal threads and carefully install the seal onto the impeller shaft. The seal is threaded to tighten counterclockwise using the custom seal wrench supplied with your blender. Apply never seize to the impeller shaft threads to aid in future maintenance. Always double-check that the seal seat is flush with the housing and clean. Clean the face of the seal on the impeller with degreaser. Use extreme caution not to hit or chip the face of the seat as you install the impeller in the housing. Remember that the shaft is locked in place with the pin through the shaft, allowing you to tighten down the impeller assembly. Remember to remove the pin from the shaft prior to operation. Now adjust the spacing on the outboard seal. Using a firm pressure with a pry tool between the upper bearing face and the bottom surface of the seal, adjust the seal's position to make firm contact with the seal seat installed in the recess in the bottom of the impeller housing. While holding this pressure, tighten the seal mounting set screw. Repeat this process for all 3 set screws. After tightening the set screws, inspect the gap in the spring-loaded ring to verify a uniform opening. When a uniform position is verified, you may remove the seal retaining clips. Store the clips in a safe place. You'll need the clips and screws when you want to remove the seal at a later date. Use the measurement you recorded during disassembly to position the pulley's split hub on the impeller shaft. Check to make sure that the pulley set screw is aligned over the key in the keyway. Apply never seize to the shaft and keyway. The pulley hub can be spread open using a screwdriver tip in the collar seam to aid in installation. Slide the hub onto the shaft using the proper distance from the end of the shaft. Make sure the key is in the proper position in the keyway. Tighten the set screw to hold the hub and key in the proper position. The pulley's split hub is machined to match the tapered shaft on the rim. The larger diameter opening slides on the shaft first. Align the holes in the pulley with the threaded holes in the hub. Install the 3 bolts and lock washers using a circular pattern to progressively tighten the pulley onto the hub. Make sure you have removed the temporary restraining pin from the impeller shaft before operating the blender. This completes the bolt-on housing assembly. Brito Liquifier's water flush seal bolt-on housing replacement procedure. Before you install the bolt-on housing, replace the housing seal. Using the bolt-on housing lift, roll the unit under the blender and pump the hydraulic cylinder to lift the housing. Carefully lift and align the housing to line up with the bolt holes. As you close the distance, visually inspect to assure that the gasket is in its proper place. Install and snug down the first of the mounting bolts. All of the mounting bolts should be coated with never seize. Install the second mounting bolt directly opposite the first bolt. Install and snug down two more of the mounting bolts. Now you can remove the two bolts connecting the lift to the housing. Lower the stand, remove it, and store it and the connecting bolts in a safe location. You can proceed to install and snug down the remaining mounting bolts. Install the bolts from side to side to equalize the pressure. Remember to use never seize. When all the bolts are installed and snug, set your torque wrench to 75 foot-pounds and tighten the bolts in a circular pattern. Repeat this circular pattern, setting your wrench at 100 pounds. Finally, set your wrench at 110 pounds and repeat the circular pattern one last time. Install the belt guard transition plate with its 6 mounting bolts. Again, using never seize is a good idea. Install any other guard plates your unit requires. Install the WaterFlushSeal's water supply lines. Install the grease fittings lubricant supply lines if your unit is equipped with this option. Reinstall the drive belt on the drive pulleys. Tighten the belt adjustment screws to move the motor mount and drive pulley to tighten the belts. You can check with your thumb to see when the belts are properly tensioned. There should be approximately 1 inch of play in the center of the belt. Measure to verify that the 2 belt adjustment screws have equal spacing. Tighten the jam nuts on the adjustment screws. Finally, tighten all 4 of the motor mounting bolts. Replace the belt drive guard. Quick clamps are useful to hold the guard in place while you thread and tighten the mounting bolts or snap the rubber latches in place. With the guards in place, your liquefier is ready to resume production.